Hello everyone, and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
We're going to talk about vehicle security, a subject high on the agenda for many listeners, especially with reported vehicle thefts up 20% in 2022. So we're delighted to welcome Mark Rose, MD of Tracker, who's going to talk about securing vehicles on your forecourt and how to further enhance the security of the vehicles you sell. So welcome to the podcast, Mark. I understand you are a regular listener.
That's right, Curtis. It's a pleasure to be on. So thank you for inviting me. Indeed, I've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast for some time now. So it's nice to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak.
Well, that already makes you a friend of the podcast, Mark. So welcome aboard.
You're in that club, Matt. You'll be all right.
Excellent stuff.
I mean, for me, we catch up on a regular basis and known each other for many years, and it's great to have you eventually on the podcast. And first off, to thank you for supporting the VRA, Vehicle Remarketing Association, recently as well, on the panel discussion. So I think it's, for me, there's some great data that we talk about on a regular basis and what's happening in your world. So welcome to the podcast, and thanks for your debut coming onto the Motor Trade Radio podcast. But let's start with some of your experience of vehicles typically targeted by thieves on dealer forecourts. Because are you seeing any particular brands and vehicle types that appear regularly on your radar at the minute?
Well, Philip, I think maybe in order to answer that question, it's useful just to understand kind of what's really driving vehicle theft at the moment more broadly. So I mean, the day of the joyrider and the opportunistic car thief is very much over. Car theft is driven by highly professional criminal gangs, and they'll generally steal for one of four reasons. Either vehicles will be stolen to order and sold in the UK, stolen to order and shipped abroad. They might be stolen to carry out further criminal activity, so whether that's drugs running or moving other stolen goods around, but also stolen for parts, so stolen, taken to a chop shop and then cut up very often to fulfill an order book. And I guess what that means in terms of what's being stolen from forecourts is it's actually a reasonably broad mix. I mean, certainly there is the higher end vehicles which are targeted. Range Rover is always highly popular because they're such desirable and valuable vehicles. But also we see quite a lot in the way of motorhomes and camper vans going too. So I guess in terms of filling those first two, then there's quite a lot in that higher end space. When it comes to ongoing criminal activity, then thieves will be looking for less conspicuous cars. So we had a spate around Nissan Qashqai. Quite recently, Vauxhall Corsa has sort of jumped up the list as well, because again, there are lots of those on the road anyway, and they're relatively inconspicuous, as I say. But then in terms of being stolen for parts, then these are very much looking for more mass market type vehicles. So, your Transits, your Fiestas. Fiesta is the most stolen vehicle across the board at the moment. Toyotas as well are kind of moving up the list too. And perhaps just to, maybe expand on that chop shop element a little bit. I mean, that is really something that's driving vehicle theft in a big way at the moment. We're seeing a real explosion in that side of things. And we can tell that because, we work closely with the police in order to close down a number of chop shops. Maybe just a little bit of background. I mean, at Tracker, we have capability called VHF, which is proprietary to us, which is a radio frequency that our devices have that allow us to get vehicles back, which can be seen in shipping containers and underground car parks, but also crucially can't be jammed. And then we also have a relationship with all 43 police forces, as well as the police in Scotland and the police service of Northern Ireland. And they have our kit in 2,000 of their police cars and all the police helicopters. So that collaboration with the police and the means that the devices can't be jammed enables us to work with them to close down chop shops. And in 2020, we got to 4 of them. In 2021, that was 9 last year. In collaboration with the police, we closed down 44 chop shops. And this year, we're at 28 already. So kind of on course to get to late 60s, 70 chop shops in a year. So that has really driven a boom in car theft. And I think that's hitting the forecourt. So as a slightly long-winded answer to your question, there's no specific target that we're seeing. It tends to be reasonably broad across vehicle types.
And in terms of forecourts, I mean, for the dealers that are listening this morning to the podcast, is there any, in terms of from the smaller independent dealers through to your franchise large groups and supermarkets, or is it purely and simply down to the type of vehicle and the access to that vehicle, irrelevant of the size of the dealership? I mean, you mentioned earlier on that it's kind of, being able to track these vehicles, but actually, you seen any specific trends where these vehicles are being stolen from?
And again, similar to the first, then we see that quite broadly across the range of types. So, we're working with a top 10 AM100 dealer group that is focusing in on prestige vehicles, and we've seen a number of vehicles go missing from their forecourts previous to us working with them. Similarly, mid-range AM100 with that kind of more mid-market vehicle. Certainly some of the prestige used car supermarkets are getting hit a bit. We had one of our customers that had 4 stolen over a weekend, which was obviously a big hit in one go. And also a motorhome dealer group that we were working with had 4 stolen in a similar time period. Fortunately, they had our devices in a couple of those, and we were able to track those down and get the other 2 back on the back as well. So again, it's not really easy to pinpoint a particular type of forecourt or dealer group that the thieves are going after.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
It's interesting what you say, Mark. So it is very much across the board, but I guess what I'm interested in is new and used cars. They're bundled with tech, in terms of locks, alarms, immobilizers, the sort of typical vehicles you'll find on dealer forecourts, whether they be franchised or independent. So what technology are thieves using to get around what's already on the car?
Yeah, and actually the level of sophistication here is incredibly high. 20, 30 years ago, it might have been kind of smash a window, hot wire it, and off you go, or break in, get some keys and off you go. But electronic compromise is the primary method for theft of vehicles at the moment. So last year, of all the vehicles that we recovered, 93% were stolen without keys. And what does that mean? I mean, there are various different ways of doing that. So relay attack, where the thieves have a piece of kit which effectively sits in between the vehicle and the keys, boosts the signal between the two, and effectively enables you to open and drive off a vehicle when the keys are in a separate location. OBD compromise, if you get into the vehicle, you can plug a device into the OBD and then effectively start it and drive it off very simply. CAN bus compromise is something that we've really seen pick up over the last probably 6 months or so. And you talk about vehicles becoming smarter and having sort of greater kind of electronics and so forth within them. Actually, CAN bus compromise, we're seeing a big thing around headlights at the moment. Increasingly, vehicles have smart headlights, and then they have those connected into effectively the central nervous system of the car. So a thief can get into the ECU connected to those headlights, and very quickly open the car and then drive it off, start it and drive it off based on that. In fact, you can go online and see videos of thieves doing that in well under a minute. So, perhaps counterintuitively, the more technology there is in cars, sometimes it's much easier to steal them. But then there's also room for sort of good old-fashioned trickery in there as well. We've seen a number of cases where you've got dealers who are offering unaccompanied test drives, and you've got thieves who have gone in with fraudulent documentation, driving license and passport, are able to get hold of the vehicle on that basis, and it doesn't come back. And actually, in one case, we had a thief who went in with fake ID for that dealer group, went in with some trade plates, said to the person at the desk, "I need this car and this car for a dealer transfer." The person handed over the keys and off they drove with them. And that was that. So there are a number of different ways that thieves will find of getting the vehicles they need to get to.
And I was going to say, interesting what you're saying there about test drives. Is that something that's on the rise, Mark?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that we saw during COVID time, certainly around the unaccompanied test drives. That was the only way you could test drive at that point. I think, as I say, there are a number of dealers that are offering these longer test drives and ensuring that there's a way of understanding where those vehicles are during that period, and having really good certification around the documentation that comes in is hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that have been in the industry as long as I have, unfortunately, listening to today's podcast, that, the days where you'd get the phone call as either sales manager or general manager where somebody's been left at a petrol station or side of a dual carriageway where the person test driving has swapped over with the salesperson.
Yes.
And just driven off, and you hear that story all the time, and you end up putting in specific test drive routes and all this lot that go in place there. And as you said earlier, this is all now moved on because it's tech, it's professional, it's about either stripping that vehicle down for parts or cloning the vehicle or exporting that vehicle. And every time I talk to you, I spend a bit of time thinking, should I get a Range Rover or something? And then I talk to you, Mark, and I think, no, I won't bother. It keeps putting me back again in the world of reality. But I mean, returning to dealers, I mean, you talk about having conversations there with AM100 dealers, particularly in that prestige marketplace. Are the dealers doing enough? Is there more that they can be doing around this? And you and I have spoken numerous times, particularly in that top-end asset valuation vehicle marketplace, and that you're getting manufacturers to insist on tracker systems within the vehicles, and insurance companies do insist on those kind of devices for some of their products. But the dealers, are they doing enough? Can they do more to protect their stock that's actually sat on their forecourt today and in the marketplace?
I think we see a real range in approaches across various different dealers. I think there are some who invest, very heavily and do an awful lot. Others who perhaps do less so. I mean, I think what we would always advocate at Tracker is multi-layered security. So I think having cameras on the forecourt, having some form of physical barriers as well, so it makes it more difficult to drive vehicles off the forecourt in an unauthorized manner, is absolutely sensible and should be kind of implemented. But then I think there is also a place for having trackers within vehicles too. As I said, with the ever increasing professionalization of car theft, if they need a particular type of vehicle to fulfill an order that has been placed, then they're going to get it one way or another. And that's why having a tracker in there is a really useful thing in order to get that back rapidly. I mean, we get well over 95% of all vehicles back, and 80% of those come back within 24 hours undamaged. And obviously that's important from an insurance and a dealer perspective.
And finally, Mark, you're talking about dealers fitting tracking devices, but what about tracking devices as upsell opportunities? Can you tell us about some of the successes dealers are having in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I mean, we're working with one of the top 10 AM 100 dealers, they have a demo program. They fit those into all of their demonstrator vehicles, and that gets around the test drive issues. It also enables them to understand how some of their staff might be driving those vehicles as well, which is often handy. But when they go to onward sell those vehicles, because that's already got a tracker attached, they can upsell a subscription for 1, 2, or 3 years, quite often included within the finance of the vehicle at a competitive rate. So they can cover the cost of that demonstrator program and make margin on top of it. But also, we work with a used car supermarket chain. They have actually a pretty good attach rate. A number of the lower end vehicles, whether that's at the sort of the Fiesta level or the Focus or a bit up from that. I guess, if people are spending £15,000 or £20,000 on a car, then that's still a huge amount of money for the majority of people. It's going to be the biggest purchase that they have, perhaps other than a property. And if that doesn't come back, that's a real problem for them. And on that basis, then that's something that I think becomes a genuine offer from the dealers into those sort of segments. Similar with light commercial vehicles. If you're buying a light commercial vehicle, it may well have a degree of customization on it. If you don't get that back and it's stolen, that's kind of your business, which is down the drain for the moment, until you're able to get that back on the road. And I think the other thing that we're seeing across a number of dealers is, as we've got the advent of agency, and I know you guys have spoken a lot about agency, as has the whole industry for a while. The opportunity to make margin on selling vehicles is reducing in a number of cases, and this is a genuine way of being able to upsell a service which there is genuine requirement for. As you say, there was actually it was 25% increase in theft in 2022, and currently only 28% of stolen vehicles ever come back, and that includes those with trackers. So there's a real value to end customers of having that sort of service on their vehicle, and obviously the dealers as well.
Well, I mean, for a quick sort of 15 minutes with you there, Mark, you've given the audience a lot to think about, and I know that within Tracker there's a lot more data that you do look at on a regular basis in terms of the top, the way the highest vehicle or the top vehicle that's stolen, how that's moving, the chop shops that you are helping to close down, etc., and some of that activity that's out there. So, I mean, it just remains to say thanks for joining us today, and I know that we will get you back on in the future to share more information and how that market's starting to shift, and I know you're quite happy to share some of that information out to the market. So if anybody does want to get in touch with you, they can quite easily find you on LinkedIn. So, I mean, thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining us today and just updating on some of the activity within that marketplace within Tracker.
Well, Philip Curtis, it was a pleasure to be on. It's great to have the opportunity to perhaps provide you and your listeners with a little insight into the ever more professional landscape that is vehicle crime at the moment.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with Philip and Curtis, come on the show or send a press release, then email them at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. You can also join the Motor Trade Radio, LinkedIn and Facebook groups, or follow the podcast on Twitter. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, bringing you all the chatter that matters.